On a Thursday morning in the fall of 1883, the people of Redemption saw something coming down the main road from the north that none of them had seen before and none of them ever forgot. A woman on a gray horse riding alone at a steady pace with a dead man draped across the saddle in front of her. She was not hurrying. She was not hiding. She rode straight down the center of that road with her chin up and both hands visible, and the kind of deliberate, unhurried calm that either means a person has done something terrible and has no conscience about it, or has done something necessary and has decided that the truth requires no apology and no speed. The people of Redemption stood on their boardwalks and watched her come, and not one of them moved to help her and not one of them moved to stop her. They just watched. The way people watch something they do not have a framework for yet and are waiting for someone else to provide one. She rode to the sheriff's office and she stopped and she looked at the deputy who had come to the door and she said, "His name is Grady Mace. He killed my husband 4 days ago on our ranch 12 miles north of here. I want to report a murder. And I want to report that I killed the man who did it in self-defense 6 miles back on the Coronado road." And then she sat there on that gray horse with the dead man in front of her and she waited for the law to do something with what she had just handed it. What the law did with it over the next 3 weeks is one of the most revealing stories the New Mexico Territory ever produced about what it believed about women, about truth, and about who gets the benefit of the doubt when two people's versions of events can no longer be reconciled because one of them is dead. Stay with me. Because this story does not end where anyone expected it to end. And the woman at the center of it, the one who rode into Redemption with a dead man and a story nobody believed, turns out to be the most credible person in the entire county. It just took the county 3 weeks and a piece of evidence nobody expected to figure that out. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand what happened on that Thursday morning in Redemption and why the 3 weeks that followed it became the most talked about period in that county's history, you need to sit with 3 questions. The first, what actually happened on that ranch 12 miles north of Redemption 4 days before she rode into town, and why was she the only witness to any of it? The second, who was Grady Mace and why did the most powerful ranching family in the county react to news of his death the way they did? And the third, the question underneath everything else in this story, what was the piece of evidence that nobody expected and why did its discovery on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks after she rode into town change everything that Redemption thought it knew about what had happened on that road? 3 questions. None of them with comfortable answers. All of them pointing toward a truth that the town of Redemption had been one piece of evidence away from getting completely wrong. And getting it wrong would have cost a woman who had already lost her husband, her freedom, her ranch, and very possibly her life. Redemption, New Mexico Territory in 1883 was a town that had chosen its name with more aspiration than accuracy. It sat on a flat stretch of high desert approximately 40 miles from the nearest territorial court, and it had the particular relationship with justice that develops when the nearest judge is a 2-day ride away and the men who own the most land have the most influence over everything that happens in the space between. It was not a lawless town exactly. It was a town where the law operated within boundaries that had been drawn by people who had reasons for drawing them where they drew them. The sheriff was a man named Aldous Crane who had held the position for 9 years and who was by most accounts a fair man operating inside a system that was not always interested in fairness. He had a deputy named Watts who was 23 years old and considerably less experienced than his confidence suggested. And the most powerful presence in the county was not the sheriff's office at all but the Mace family ranch, the largest cattle operation in 3 counties, run by a patriarch named Silas Mace who had 3 sons and a reach that extended into every significant institution in the territory within a reasonable distance of Redemption. Vera Calloway was 34 years old in the fall of 1883 and she had been in the New Mexico Territory for 6 years, long enough to have built something real and hard enough to know exactly what she had built and what it had cost. She and her husband Daniel had come from Kansas in 1877 with a modest stake and a specific intention, and they had spent 6 years turning that intention into a working ranch 12 miles north of Redemption that was small by the territory standards and entirely theirs. Daniel Calloway was a quiet, steady man who built things carefully and maintained them with the same care. Vera was the one who ran the books, negotiated supply arrangements, and had the kind of precise memory for detail that made her a difficult person to mislead twice. She had dark hair going slightly gray at the temples and eyes that people in Redemption described as the kind that made you think carefully about whether you were being entirely accurate before you said something to her face. She was not a woman who was easy to lie to. This detail would matter enormously in 3 weeks. What the Calloways had in common with the Mace family was a fence line and a water source. What they did not have in common with the Mace family was anything else at all. The Mace Ranch had been pushing at the boundary of the Calloway property for 2 years through the legal and semi-legal means that powerful ranching families used in that era: disputed surveys, redirected water, cattle that wandered across fence lines with convenient regularity. Daniel Calloway had filed 3 formal complaints. None of them had produced any visible result. In September of 1883, the pressure between the Calloway Ranch and the Mace operation reached a point that formal complaints and disputed surveys could no longer contain. And what happened over the course of 4 days in late September produced the Thursday morning that Redemption never forgot. It started on a Sunday. 3 men from the Mace operation arrived at the Calloway Ranch in the late afternoon, not as a formal delegation and not in the manner of men who had come to talk. They came the way men come when the talking phase has been decided against. Vera was in the house. Daniel went out to meet them. What was said between them Vera heard through the window but could not hear clearly enough to transcribe word for word. What she saw clearly was the moment it stopped being a conversation. Daniel was struck from behind by a man she identified later as Grady Mace, the youngest of Silas Mace's 3 sons, 28 years old, known in the county for having his father's ambition without his father's patience. Daniel fell and did not get up. The 3 men left. Vera went to her husband. Daniel Calloway died on Wednesday evening from the injury he had sustained on Sunday. He was conscious for most of those 4 days. He told Vera everything he could remember. He gave her the names. He told her what had been said. And on Wednesday night, with Daniel gone and the ranch completely quiet around her, Vera Calloway made the decision that produced the Thursday morning. She was not going to wait for the law to come to her. She was going to take the evidence to the law herself. She knew where Grady Mace would be on Thursday morning because Grady Mace had a predictable routine that the entire county knew. She rode out before dawn. She found him on the Coronado Road 6 miles south of the Calloway property. She had a rifle. She told him she was placing him under citizen's arrest for the murder of Daniel Calloway. Grady Mace reached for his gun. Vera Calloway fired first. And then she put him across her saddle and rode to Redemption to tell the truth about all of it. The deputy Watts took her statement. Sheriff Crane arrived within the hour. And the reaction of the Redemption law enforcement apparatus to what Vera Calloway had done was shaped almost immediately by a factor that had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with geography and power. Silas Mace arrived at the sheriff's office within 2 hours of Vera's arrival. He was accompanied by a lawyer. And the story that emerged from that meeting, the counter-narrative that Silas Mace and his lawyer constructed in the 2 hours between hearing about Grady's death and appearing at the sheriff's office, was that Vera Calloway had ambushed and murdered his son on the Coronado Road in retaliation for a property dispute, and that her claims about what had happened to Daniel Calloway were the fabrications of a woman who had planned this from the beginning. Vera was taken into custody. Her ranch was placed under a legal hold. And the town of Redemption, which had watched her ride in on that gray horse with the dead man and had not yet decided what to think, began to decide what to think in the direction that power usually pushes thinking when it applies itself. Sheriff Crane was not a dishonest man. He was a man operating inside a system that was not always honest and trying to find the truth inside that constraint. He interviewed Vera 3 times in the first week. Her account never changed. Not one detail. Not the sequence. Not the names. Not the words Daniel had told her from his sickbed over 4 days. She gave the same account with the same precision each time, and the consistency of it bothered Crane in the specific way that the truth bothers a person who has been expecting something easier to dismiss. The problem was that Grady Mace was dead and Daniel Calloway was dead, and the only living witness to either event was the woman who was currently in custody and whose testimony was being contested by the most powerful family in the county. The two other men who had come to the Calloway ranch on that Sunday afternoon had vanished with the efficiency of men who had been told to vanish. Silas Mace's lawyer was producing witnesses who claimed to have seen Vera Calloway on the Coronado road that morning in a position that suggested she had been waiting rather than pursuing. The case was moving in one direction, and that direction was not toward the truth. And then on a Tuesday afternoon in the third week, Sheriff Crane rode out to the Calloway ranch to conduct what he described in his report as a final inspection of the property before the legal proceedings were concluded. He was looking for anything that would help him understand what had happened on that Sunday. He found it in the last place he looked. Under the floorboards of the barn, in a waterproof oilskin pouch that Daniel Calloway had apparently placed there at some point before Sunday, Crane could not determine exactly when, was a collection of documents. Survey records, correspondence, and 3 signed statements from neighboring ranchers describing specific incidents of intimidation and property violation by the Mace operation going back 18 months. Daniel Calloway had been building a case. Quietly and carefully, and with the specific thoroughness of a man who knew that when the moment came he would need evidence that could not be dismissed. The documents changed everything. Not immediately. Not cleanly. Nothing in the New Mexico Territory in 1883 changed immediately or cleanly when the Mace family had a lawyer involved. But the documents gave Sheriff Crane something he had not had before: corroboration. The 3 neighboring ranchers whose statements were in that pouch were brought in and questioned. All 3 confirmed what they had signed. The 2 men who had been told to vanish were located in a town 40 miles east and brought back under considerably less comfortable circumstances than they had departed under. Their accounts, given separately and without coordination, confirmed Vera Calloway's version of the Sunday afternoon in every significant detail. Vera Calloway was released from custody on a Friday morning in October 1883 after 22 days. The charges against her were formally dropped. A territorial investigation into the Mace operation's land practices was opened the following month based on Daniel Calloway's documents. Silas Mace's lawyer filed 3 separate motions to have the investigation dismissed. All 3 failed. 2 of the men who had come to the Calloway ranch that Sunday were eventually convicted of assault contributing to death. Silas Mace himself was never charged. The reach of his money and his influence proved sufficient to keep the most serious consequences at a distance that the territorial system in 1883 could not close. Vera Calloway went back to her ranch. She ran it alone for 3 years. She fought every legal challenge the Mace family brought, and they brought several, with the same precise memory and the same consistent account that had made her difficult to dismiss in 3 weeks of interrogation. She won every challenge. The ranch remained hers. What stayed with Sheriff Crane long after the case was closed, what he mentioned in a letter to the Territorial Marshal's office written 6 months later that survives in the historical record, was one specific detail about Vera Calloway's 22 days in custody. He said that in 3 weeks of questioning he had never caught her in a single inconsistency. Not one. He said that in his experience the truth told by someone who was there was the only account that never required adjustment. He said that Vera Calloway's account never required adjustment because Vera Calloway had been there. And he said, and this is the line from his letter that I have been thinking about since I first found it, he said that the only thing more extraordinary than a woman who rides into town with a dead man and a story nobody believes is the town that takes 3 weeks to understand that the reason her story never changed was because it was true. The town of Redemption never formally apologized to Vera Calloway. Towns in 1883 did not do that. But the people of Redemption who had stood on those boardwalks and watched her ride in, the ones who had watched her and waited for someone else to provide the framework, those people lived for the rest of their lives with the knowledge of what it had cost a woman that they had not helped that Thursday morning. And some of them, it is said, found that knowledge considerably heavier than they had expected. She deserved better from that town on that Thursday morning. She knew it. And in the end, in the only way that the frontier occasionally managed, she got it anyway. This has been just one more story. Thanks for watching.